Hitting 50 doesn't mean you're supposed to start over. Not the way people used to mean it, anyway. For most of modern history, there was a script for men in the second half of life. If you got divorced, you bounced back by finding another wife. If you were widowed, you were expected to move on in a way that looked respectable. A new partner, a new household, a new version of the same structure. The message was subtle, but constant. A man alone is unfinished. That script is breaking, quietly, steadily, and in a way you can feel in everyday life. Look at the pattern. Remarriage among men over 50 in the United States has dropped sharply in the last couple of decades by the kind of margin you don't explain away with a passing trend. Depending on which data set you're looking at, people cite declines on the order of tens of percentage points since the mid-2000s, and long-run drops from the remarriage rates seen in the 1980s. The exact number matters less than the direction. Fewer men are signing up for marriage again, and they're doing it on purpose. Not because they can't, not because they're angry at love, not because they gave up, because they finally understood the difference between connection and surrender. Here's what people get wrong. They assume men avoid remarriage because they're scared of being hurt again. Sometimes that's part of it, sure, but for most men who've already built a life once and watched it dissolve, this isn't about fear. It's about clarity. It's about consequence. It's about what 50 teaches you that 20 can't even spell. At 25, you can rebuild from ashes because you still have time to burn. At 55, you rebuild differently because you've learned what it costs to start over. And that's the point. Men over 50 aren't refusing love. They're refusing the old deal. They're refusing the assumption that commitment must be legal, financial, and structural to be real. They're refusing the idea that companionship has to come with a contract. They're refusing the social pressure that says a quiet life is the same thing as a lonely one. A quiet life isn't a sad life. It can be a chosen life. And for a growing number of men, that choice is the most powerful thing they've done in decades. Let's name the turning point. It's not money. Not only money. Yes, money is involved. Anyone pretending otherwise is either naive or selling something. When a marriage ends later in life, the numbers are heavier. You're dividing assets that took decades to build. You're looking at retirement accounts, property, insurance, estate planning, adult children with expectations, and the long shadow of legal obligations. Men talk about it in plain language because they have to. Alimony, asset division, legal fees, the risk of blending households, the risk of a second split. But the deeper issue isn't dollars, it's control. Control over your time, your home, your peace, your routines, your health, your priorities, your future. You can't understand this until you've lived through the moment when your own house stops feeling like your own, when your calendar becomes an argument, when silence becomes suspicious, when rest feels like negligence, when your personal boundaries are treated like selfishness. And here's what midlife teaches you. Peace is not negotiable the way it used to be. When you're young, you can tolerate chaos because you still believe you'll outgrow it. When you're older, you've seen enough to know chaos doesn't shrink on its own. It just gets louder and more expensive and more complicated. So men adapt. They don't retreat from people. They retreat from arrangements that swallow them. They stop measuring their worth by who is sleeping next to them. They stop living like their life needs outside approval to count. They stop performing. Because one of the sharpest realizations of the second half of life is this. Nobody is watching the way you thought they were. No coworker is waiting to be impressed by your comeback. No family gathering truly depends on your engagement announcement. No neighbor is keeping score of whether you have a ring on. The audience you imagined when you were younger, it left the room years ago. And once a man realizes he's been performing for an empty theater, he starts building a life that actually fits. Now, let's be honest about something else people avoid saying out loud. A lot of women in this age range aren't chasing marriage either. That surprises people because it clashes with the old stereotypes. But the modern reality is more practical. Many women over 50 have their own money, their own families, their own homes, their own routines, their own scars, and their own hard won peace. They might want companionship, they might want intimacy, they might want partnership in the human sense, someone to share dinners with, trips with, conversations with, laughter with, but they don't necessarily want to merge lives on paper, and many men don't either. So what you're seeing isn't just men avoiding commitment. You're seeing a new kind of agreement forming, sometimes spoken, sometimes unspoken. We can care about each other without recreating the structure that broke us. We can love without erasing ourselves. We can be close without making it complicated. No rings, no shared deeds, no forced timelines, no future faking, no grand promises made to quiet insecurity. Just companionship with clear boundaries, and respect strong enough to hold those boundaries without punishment. That's not a failure of romance. It's a refinement of it. It's adults behaving like adults. To understand it, you have to listen to what men actually say when they stop talking for other people. Here's Robert, 55, built a career in high pressure rooms, spent decades doing what men are told to do: provide, grind, push, sacrifice. Marriage, to him, wasn't a fairy tale, it was a partnership project. Build the life, build the security, build the future. Then the marriage ended. Not with fireworks, not with drama for the movies, just a slow collapse that became official paperwork. And here's what Robert lost that surprised him most: not the money, not the property, not the assets. He lost the illusion that love has to come with a shared ledger. He did the practical things. He simplified. He sold what didn't matter. He separated what needed separating. He rebuilt a financial foundation that didn't depend on anyone else's cooperation. Then he did something even more radical for a man raised on duty. He built a life that belonged to him, not half his, not a negotiated version, not a compromise designed to keep the peace. His, 6 months of the year in a place where nobody knows his history. 6 months fixing up a cabin with his own hands. Wood and nails and quiet. The kind of quiet you can only appreciate after years of noise. He dates. He enjoys women. He values connection. But the terms changed. No names on deeds. No rushing. No blending everything until it's impossible to untangle. No confusing intensity with intimacy. People call that guarded. Robert calls it sane, because there's a truth men learn the hard way. If you have to gamble your stability to prove your feelings, the arrangement is already unstable. His cabin isn't just a cabin, it's proof of sovereignty. It's the last thing he owns entirely by choice. And for a lot of men, choice is the new luxury. Then there's David. David didn't divorce. He didn't trade up. He didn't walk away. He lost his wife. 30 years of shared mournings, shared grief, shared routines so small they seem meaningless until they vanish. The way she made coffee, the way she hummed without noticing, the way the house felt when she was there. Then illness, then hospitals, then the strange, brutal quiet after the funeral when the world expects you to be strong and then expects you to be over it, as if love is a switch you flip to satisfy other people's comfort. Friends urged him to get back out there. He didn't explode at them. He didn't lecture them. He just withdrew. Not from women, from vows. Because when you've watched a life you thought was stable disappear in less than a year, you don't become cynical. You become aware. You understand how fragile the ground is. David still loves. He still laughs. He still shows up. He takes his grandkids to the zoo on Saturdays. He learns to paint, not to impress anybody, but because quiet afternoons need something gentle. He builds routines that don't require him to perform happiness on command. And here's the part people misunderstand. David isn't refusing life. He's refusing pressure. He's refusing the idea that grief is a problem to solve with a new relationship. He's refusing the assumption that companionship is the only proof you're okay. Sometimes the healthiest thing a man can say is, I'm not lonely, I'm healing. And healing doesn't need an audience. At this age, stillness isn't emptiness, it's restoration. Now meet Mike. Mike didn't leave because he stopped loving his wife. He left because he stopped recognizing himself. He hit his early 50s and realized the house was paid down. The kids were grown. The schedule was predictable. And his life felt like it belonged to someone he used to be. The ring didn't feel like devotion anymore. It felt like inertia. So he made a decision that scared him. He chose himself. After the divorce, he didn't rush to win by replacing what he lost. He didn't post a highlight reel. He didn't hunt for validation. He went into the woods, 4 months on a long trail. No signal, no audience, no performance. Just boots, weather, breath, and the reality you can't escape. When there's no one to blame and no one to impress, you find out who you actually are. He came back calmer, not lonelier, clearer. He took up pottery, not because it's trendy, but because it forces patience. He volunteered, not as a virtue display, but because purpose feels different when it's chosen instead of assigned. He traveled alone and realized something most men never learn until it's too late. Solitude can be a skill, not a sentence. Mike dates sometimes, but he doesn't bend his life out of shape to keep a relationship alive. He won't bury himself again just to avoid being alone. And men like Mike are the reason this whole conversation matters. They're not running away from women. They're running away from the version of themselves they had to become to survive relationships that required self-erasure. And then there's Tom. Tom didn't wake up at 58 thinking about romance. He woke up thinking about oxygen. A heart scare changes a man faster than a motivational speech ever will. One day, you're busy, distracted, pushing checkups off because you're fine. The next day, you understand your body doesn't care about your excuses. So Tom changed his life the way men do when reality finally has teeth. He got disciplined, morning walks, clean food, strength work, sleep, less alcohol, more water, more movement, no negotiations. Then he tried dating again, and he noticed something that sounds small until you've lived it. Lifestyle mismatch at this age isn't annoying, it's dangerous. At 25, incompatible routines are a nuisance. At 55, they can derail your health, your recovery, your sanity. He met women who wanted dinners late at night, weekends built around indulgence, and constant togetherness that left no room for his habits. They didn't mean harm, but they didn't understand that his routines weren't preferences, they were survival. Tom isn't anti-relationship, he's anti-sabotage. He wants someone who respects discipline, not someone who competes with it. Someone who can sit with quiet without taking it personally. Someone who doesn't interpret a man's boundaries as rejection. So Tom doesn't want a wife anymore. He wants a companion, maybe a partner in the human sense, not a co owner of his life. A person who fits into the life he's fighting to keep. Because at this age, the biggest risk isn't it being alone. It's slowly becoming someone else's idea of who you should be until you don't recognize yourself again. So, what's really happening with men over 50? It's not a crisis, it's a correction. And it's men noticing that the old model asked them to trade too much of themselves for a label. For decades, we sold men the same deal: be needed, be useful, be stable, be the provider, and you'll earn love, respect, identity. But a lot of men reached 50 and realized something bitter: being. Needed isn't the same as being known. Being useful isn't the same as being valued. And being married isn't the same as being at peace. Once a man sees that, he starts making different choices. He starts choosing presence over performance. Instead of chasing the appearance of a complete life, he builds a life that feels complete from the inside. He stops outsourcing meaning to a relationship status. He learns to enjoy his own company, not as a coping mechanism, but as a foundation. Because a man who can stand on his own 2 feet emotionally is a man who can choose love without desperation. And that changes everything. Now, let me say something clearly because it's important. None of this is a speech against women. This is not bitterness dressed up as wisdom. A man can respect women deeply and still decide that marriage, especially remarriage, is not the right structure for his next chapter. A man can want a companionship and still protect what he rebuilt. A man can love someone and still say, I'm not merging my life in a way that makes me smaller. In fact, healthy women often respect this more than anyone. Because the women worth your time at this stage aren't shopping for a rescue mission. They're not looking for man to fund their life or manage their emotions. They're looking for something rarer: a man who knows himself, a man who can communicate, a man who can offer steady presence without control, a man who doesn't confuse commitment with possession. That's the kind of man you become when you stop performing and start living. So, what does moving on mean now? It used to mean replacing. Replace the wife, replace the household, replace the identity, prove you're still chosen. Now it means something tougher, something quieter, something more mature. It means keeping the keys to your own house, literally and metaphorically. It means owning your time. It means deciding what peace looks like and refusing to trade it for approval. It means building a life so solid that love becomes an addition, not a rescue. That's why the men who don't remarry aren't automatically the lonely ones. Often, they're the men who've seen too much. They've watched legal battles burn through savings. They've watched second marriages collapse faster than the first because the same patterns showed up in different clothes. They've watched friends lose years to conflict that never ended. They've buried someone they truly loved and then felt the bizarre pressure to get back out there, as if grief is an inconvenience. They've learned that love can be real and still end. They've learned that good intentions don't protect you from bad outcomes. And they've learned that peace is not guaranteed by a relationship, it's protected by choices. There's also a cultural shift that matters here. Dating used to be a pipeline to marriage. Now, for people over 50, dating is often just dating. It's companionship. It's shared experiences. It's closeness with boundaries. That isn't moral decline. It's realism. People are living longer. Retirement looks different. Family structures are more complex. Adult children have opinions. Estates matter. Health insurance matters. Housing costs matter. Caregiving responsibilities appear with little warning, and men, especially, are waking up to something they didn't always have language for. A relationship can be loving and still be structurally risky, so they build new models. Some choose long term partnership without marriage. Some choose living apart, together committed, but separate homes. Some choose companionship that's steady, but not legally entangled. Some choose to stay single and build rich networks of friendship, community, purpose, and family. The details differ, but the principle is the same: connection without surrender, love without self erasure, companionship without contracts you can't afford to sign again financially, emotionally, or spiritually. And here's the part I want to land on, because it's what men need to hear when they're standing at the edge of this chapter. If you're 50, 55, 60, and you feel that old pressure, find someone, lock it down, prove you're not alone. Pause. Ask a better question than who should I be with? Ask, who am I when I'm not auditioning? Because a lot of men never meet themselves. They meet their roles: husband, provider, fixer, worker, problem solver. The man who takes care of everyone else. The man who swallows his own needs until they harden into resentment. The second half of life is your chance to stop living as a function and start living as a person, not selfishly, honestly. That means building a home that feels like refuge, not obligation. It means building routines that keep you healthy, not just busy. It means building friendships that don't revolve around complaining, but around growth and loyalty. It means learning how to sit in silence without calling it emptiness. It means doing the work most men were never taught: identifying what you actually feel, what you actually want, and what you will no longer trade away just to be accepted. Because here's the truth nobody tells men directly: the goal isn't to be chosen. The goal is to choose well. Choose the kind of life you can respect. Choose the kind of relationships that make you more yourself, not less. Choose peace, even if it looks boring to people who confuse drama with meaning. Choose presence. Choose clarity. Choose a life that you don't need to escape from. So, no, hitting 50 doesn't mean you're supposed to start over. Not in the old way. It means you finally get to stop pretending. It means you get to design the next chapter with the wisdom you earned the hard way. It means you can stop measuring masculinity by endurance and start measuring it by integrity. Because a man who can stand alone without collapsing is not a man who failed. He's a man who's free. And freedom at this age isn't reckless, it's deliberate. It's a quiet home, a clean conscience, a strong body, a clear calendar, and relationships that don't require you to shrink. It's waking up and realizing you don't need permission to be happy. It's understanding that you can be cherished without being owned. It's accepting that the most radical act for a man over 50 isn't proving he can still get someone. It's proving mostly to himself that he can finally live as himself. And if remarriage rates keep falling, maybe that's not a crisis. Maybe it's evidence. Evidence that men are learning something vital. A peaceful life is not a consolation prize. It's a victory. So if you're wondering whether it's too late to begin again, don't ask if you should rebuild the old structure. Ask whether you're ready to live the life you've already earned. The one that's quieter, the one that's truer, the one that doesn't require a performance. Here's to the men who chose themselves not in isolation, not in bitterness, but in strength. And here's to the calm, unshakable peace that follows when a man finally stops negotiating with the parts of him that have been asking for air.